Hello, welcome back to Koala Moon. I'm Abbe, and tonight we're going to get all cozy with a special collection, Bedtime in Sleepy Forest, our favourite soothing animal bedtime stories to help you fall asleep. Before we start, if you love our stories, please tap subscribe. It really means the world to us. Thank you. Now, let's settle down. Get comfy and I'll begin.
This is Midnight and the Mouse by Gillian Rogerson. In a burrow beneath an old oak tree, a young mouse called Millie refused to go to bed. She told her mum she wasn't the tiniest bit tired, and she told her dad she wanted to go outside and play. She said she was going to stay up all night. Millie's mum and dad tried everything to get their little mouse to sleep. A cup of warm milk in Millie's favourite mug, a soothing lullaby from her dad, and lots of warm hugs. But nothing worked on Millie. Millie's mum decided there was only one thing left to do. She collected 3 acorn tops from the far side of the burrow and took them outside. She carefully placed them on the grass beneath the branches of the old oak tree. Then she waited. For the creatures of Sleepy Forest know magical help is always available to those who need it. And one way to summon that help is by placing 3 acorn tops outside a home. Within seconds, assistance arrived for Millie's mum in the shape of a small fairy. The fairy's silver wings fluttered gently. She was wearing a dress the colour of the night sky, and a dark blue velvet pouch hung around her waist. The fairy looked at Millie's mum and softly said, "You called for me?" "I did," Millie's mum answered. "My little one won't go to sleep. Can you help me, please?" "Indeed I can. Where is the restless one?" Millie popped her head out of the burrow. Her eyes widened when she saw the fairy. The fairy's eyes twinkled like stars as she looked at Millie. "Hello, my name is Midnight. I'm a sleep fairy. I'm going to help you fall asleep tonight." "I'm not tired," Millie replied. "I know," the fairy said with a smile. "Come with me." Millie looked at her mum to see if it was okay to go with the fairy. Her mum gave her a tired nod. Midnight took Millie by the paw and they headed into the moonlit forest. Millie's whiskers twitched as they walked along. She'd never been out of the burrow at night before. The air smelled different, and Millie wasn't sure if she liked it. Millie asked the fairy where they were going. Midnight replied, "It seems to be a night when many mums and dads are having trouble getting their babies to sleep. We're going to help them." "How?" Millie asked. With a mysterious smile, Midnight said, "You'll see." Midnight led Millie over to the hedgerow where a family of hedgehogs lived. The baby hedgehogs were asking their mother for another bedtime story. But the mother had already told them 2 stories, and she just could not think of another tale to tell her babies. Midnight saw what was happening and reached into the velvet pouch which was tied around her waist. She pulled out a handful of rainbow-coloured glitter and gently cast it into the air. The glitter caught on a breeze and floated towards the mother hedgehog. The shimmering sparkles landed on her prickles, shone brightly for a second, and then melted. The mother hedgehog suddenly smiled at her babies and said, "Let me tell you the tale about the 100-year-old hedgehog who had the power to grant wishes. Once upon a time, in a land not far from here, there lived the most magical creature." Millie and Midnight stayed nearby and listened to the captivating story. One by one, the young hedgehogs started to drift off to sleep. Millie felt her eyes growing heavy too. Midnight whispered to Millie, "Are you ready for sleep?" Millie's eyes opened. She shook her head. "I'm not tired." The fairy nodded. "Okay, come with me." They came to a stop near a family of badgers next. The young badgers were running around the burrow while their parents looked on helplessly. Midnight pulled some glitter from her pouch and sent it fluttering towards the mum and dad badger. Millie wondered what was going to happen next. She soon found out. As the magical glitter landed on the parents, they started to sing. Soft, lilting notes came from both of them. The young badgers became as still as statues as the mesmerizing melody filled their home. The little badgers settled down and listened in complete silence as their mum and dad performed a dreamy duet. One by one, the babies fell asleep. Millie lay down and put her head on her paws. Midnight whispered to her, "Are you ready for sleep?" Millie stood up and said, "I'm not tired." The fairy nodded. "Okay, come with me. We have to check on the creatures of the forest." Under the light of the moon, Millie continued to walk with Midnight through Sleepy Forest. Together, they climbed a tree and checked on the snoozing squirrels who were snuggled between the branches. After that, Midnight and the mouse went down a hole at the edge of a glade. They walked along twisting tunnels until they found a family of resting rabbits. Their next journey took them to the far side of a meadow, where they found some deer dozing behind the hanging branches of a weeping willow tree. All over the forest came the hushed voices of parents saying, "Good night, sweet dreams, we love you." Midnight gave Millie a gentle smile and said, Everyone is asleep.
I'm not.
Millie said with a little yawn. Midnight took a handful of glitter from her pouch and gave half of it to Millie. She told the little mouse, "There's one more thing we have to do tonight." Millie looked at the glitter in her paw and asked, "What?" "We need to send peaceful dreams around the forest. Watch." The fairy gently blew the glitter into the air. Millie did the same. The glitter twirled and whirled around the fairy and the mouse and surrounded them in a rainbow-coloured halo. Millie watched in amazement as one fuzzy image after another appeared on the sparkling curtain in front of her. "What's happening?" Millie asked. Midnight explained. "These are what creatures of the forest dream about. Let's send these dreams on their way." She slowly moved her hands back and forth through the air, as if conducting an orchestra. Millie copied her. The rainbow-coloured sparkles grouped together and made dream bubbles. Inside each bubble, images began to move. The dream bubble floated closer to Millie. She saw a smiling otter inside it. He was lying on his back and floating down a river. The faint tinkling sound of water came from the bubble. The river slowly carried the otter under a wooden bridge. Reflections of the water danced on the underneath of the bridge. The otter continued floating along and passed by a field full of purple plants. A peaceful scent of lavender wafted towards Millie and made her whiskers twitch. She felt the gentle heat of the sun on her fur, as if she were actually inside the dream bubble with the otter. Her little body felt warm and weightless as she continued to watch the otter drift downstream. A soft wind caught the dream bubble and sent it on its way. Another bubble came close. Millie saw a laughing frog inside it. The frog was joyfully leaping from lily pad to lily pad across a pond. His laughter was light and infectious, and Millie found herself laughing along with him. The dream bubble rose from her and went on its way. A third bubble appeared. Inside was a mole walking through a moonlit meadow. He was looking left and right, as if searching for someone. Out of the shadows came another mole. She smiled shyly. "My love," the first mole called out. dance with me on this fine evening? Of course I will, my sweetheart, the other one replied. As the moon looked down, the love-struck moles moved towards each other, their paws outstretched. The couple held paws as they danced lightly around the meadow. Watching them made Millie's heart feel full of love. She let out a happy sigh, which caused the dream bubble to glide away. The next bubble showed a wise-looking owl perched at the top of a tree. She was chatting to the full moon. Isn't it a beautiful evening? The owl said. It certainly is, the moon replied. But don't you think the stars could look a little brighter? The owl tipped her head to one side, looked closer at the stars and said, Perhaps. The moon asked the owl if she would be kind enough to polish the stars for him. Not all of them, the moon said with a smile. Just these ones nearby. The owl fluffed up her feathers before taking to the sky. Using her wings, she gently cleaned the stars until they sparkled like diamonds. Once she was satisfied that enough stars had been polished, the owl returned to the tree. In happy harmony, the owl and the moon gazed at the sky and agreed it looked extra enchanting that night. Millie's eyes felt very tired as she watched the bubble slip up into the dark sky. Her heavy legs couldn't take another step. She lay down and said to the fairy, I'm tired. I know it's time for you to go home. Midnight softly stroked Millie's head. We don't have to walk back. For the last time that night, Millie took some glitter from her pouch. She sprinkled it on the ground. A rainbow-coloured cloud appeared above the grass. The fairy helped Millie onto the cloud. It felt soft, warm and snuggling. Midnight sat next to Millie and tucked the cosy cloud around the mouth like a blanket until only Millie's little face peeked out. The cloud rose smoothly from the ground and headed skyward. Millie couldn't keep her eyes open a moment longer. She turned on her side and curled up into a ball. Midnight kissed the top of Millie's head and whispered, Go to sleep. Millie snuggled down even further in the cloud. It felt like a warm hug. Sleep came closer to her as the cloud drifted across the night sky. A small smile came to Millie's face as she heard the distant hoot of an owl, and she wondered if owls really did polish stars. Night-time sounds carried on in whispering wings as the fairy and the mouse headed towards the burrow beneath the old oak tree. More dream bubbles floated in the night sky as gentle as wishes. Millie didn't see them, but the little fairy did. Midnight smiled when she saw the carefree animals inside the bubbles. There were going to be a lot of restful sleeps in Sleepy Forest tonight. Before too long, Millie felt herself being lifted from the cloud by her dad's familiar arms. She was taken into her cozy burrow and placed in her warm bed. She sighed happily as Millie drifted off into a deep and happy slumber. She heard her mum and dad say, "Good night, sweet dreams. We love you."
The Mole, the Vole, and the Coziest Hole by Jane Thomas. Deep in the heart of Sleepy Forest, near the meadows of wildflowers that pour down hillsides towards a silver trickle of a stream, lives a tiny little creature called Viola Velvet. She has the softest fur you can ever imagine, a dusky grey that almost, in the half-light of the early morning or late afternoon, becomes the grey-blue colour of lavender. Viola Velvet is a vole, and she lives quite alone, exactly as she likes it. Oh, she's more than happy to spend time with friends, and almost every other day she heads along to visit one of her sisters in their burrows. But every evening, she heads back home and sinks back into the cushions of her armchair and smiles contentedly to herself. She has her favourite pictures on the walls. She has her favourite books on the shelves. The kitchen is filled with her favourite foods. Her mattress is just as soft as she likes it to be, and nobody ever leaves a damp towel on the floor of the bathroom. Viola Velvet's favourite saying is, "A place for everything, and everything in its place." The candlesticks on the mantelpiece know exactly where they are expected to stand, and the rugs on the floor know precisely which furniture they must line up with, and the mugs and jugs, cans and pans in the kitchen all know in which cupboard they belong. Whenever she does her washing and goes outside to peg it onto the line in her back garden, the socks are always hung up in pairs. The arms of the tops wouldn't dream of being inside out. And her handkerchiefs know how to flutter in unison when the breezes blow. I wouldn't like you to think that Viola Velvet was a boring vole or any such thing. She's actually a terribly interesting vole who has 1,000 thoughts whirling in her head at any one moment. And she has found that everything is a little bit clearer if she organises the world around her as much as she can. That way, her eye, and therefore mind, doesn't get distracted by a crooked picture frame or a book that is somewhere it has no business being, or a pair of pyjamas hanging awkwardly over the end of the bed. When everything around you is organised, your mind can get back to doing what it does best, imagining things. Viola Velvet is, in fact, a writer. And funnily enough, the only part of her burrow that is allowed to have a little disorder is her writing room. She uses a typewriter, one of those big old-fashioned ones, where you have to really push the keys down, and where the thing where the paper is rolled in makes a satisfying ching when it hits the end of the line and goes back to start a new one. There are always vases filled to overflowing with flowers in this writing room, taken from her garden that's allowed to grow wild. The little vole is a big believer in letting plants and shrubs and bushes do their own thing, which means she has flowers and trees growing in her garden that appear nowhere else in Sleepy Forest. Viola Velvet writes all sorts of books, from cosy mysteries featuring stolen cakes to flights of fancy where anything is possible, to historical stories that dive back into the past, and futuristic stories that reach forwards into a world yet to be seen. Today is a very special day to be introducing you to Viola Velvet, because today is a rare day when she breaks from her routine. Today one of her best friends is coming to visit, and he will even stay with her for a few days. Because she so very rarely has anyone near her home, she makes enormous efforts to ensure they have a wonderful, cosy, relaxing time with her. She makes extra trips to the market to be sure of having their favourite foods waiting for them in the kitchen, and she takes the spare blankets from her dresser and places them over the other armchair in the living room, so her guests too can curl up cosy and warm in the evening. One of her quirks, or perhaps it's one of her charms, is that she always sends a list of questions to anyone who will visit. She asks their shoe size, so she can be sure to have a pair of fluffy slippers ready by the door when they arrive. She asks if they'd like bigger pillows or smaller pillows, and whether they want their head to sink into a pillow or float on top. She asks their favourite colour and their favourite scent. And when she has all this information, she carefully files it away in a special drawer, the completed questionnaires all tied up with a length of golden thread. Today, Viola reaches for this bundle and then goes through the papers, smiling as she sees the names of all her friends at the top, searching through until she finds the right one. There it is. Walter the Mole is coming to see her, and there's the questionnaire he first filled out, maybe 20 years ago now. They have been friends for a terribly long time after all. She almost knows it by heart. That extraordinary brain of hers remembers this sort of thing, but she likes to check and be sure. Whoever is visiting will always feel as if they've visited the loveliest, warmest, snuggest, safest, and cosiest hole in the world. Last week, Viola finished her most recent book, a wonderful story, all about disappearing around the world on a moonbeam. and she always takes a few weeks off after completing an entire book. The first week is spent enjoying doing nothing much at all and stretching her back out after months spent hunched over her typewriter. She revisits the garden and says hello to all the new flowers that have arrived in her absence, and she sniffs the air to remind herself whether summer or autumn or winter or spring is on its way. When you spend your life burrowed away inside the coziest of holes, it's easy to forget where in the year you are. And after that first week of reacquainting herself with the world, Viola will take up her pen and write a letter to a particular friend, asking if they would like to visit. Nobody has ever said no. Everybody loves visiting Viola, and they share stories of what's been happening in Sleepy Forest, and she shares the stories that have been dancing around in her mind, and they tut together at the things that should be tutted at, and laugh together at the things that make them smile. Walter's reply to Viola's letter had been a single word. Yes, he'd written in giant letters on a piece of paper so large he'd folded it 4 times over to fit into the envelope, a huge exclamation mark after the S to show his excitement at coming to visit. And today is the day Viola will cast a final look around the house. She watches as the candlesticks shuffle millimeters to the left, back into their perfect spots, and she opens the cutlery drawer just in time to watch a spoon jump into its rightful place, back away from where it had accidentally been placed with the forks. There are no windows, of course, because Viola lives underground, but she has hung curtains in various places and has them drawn permanently closed, so it seems as if there really are windows just behind them. As she watches, the curtains hang as straight as they can, flowery patterns lining up perfectly with each other. Content that the house is in order, Viola heads up the passageway to her round front door, a perfect circle of red made from the button of a very large winter coat a person had once worn. The door closes behind her, and Viola strolls along the pathway that winds itself through the wildness of her garden, then heads up through the meadow to wait at the bus stop for Walter to arrive. Viola has remarkably little interest in the time of day, and there isn't a single clock or watch or timepiece in her home. But as soon as she goes outside, she knows just what time it is. She sniffs the air to measure for dampness and warmth, and which flowers are growing and which are fast asleep. And with that, she knows the time of year. And then she looks at the sun and where it is hanging in the sky, and with that, she knows the exact time of day. So Viola knows she's arrived at the bus stop with 7 whole minutes to spare, and she spends the time rising and falling on her toes and watching the swallows sweep in great arcs through the sky. Then there the goose bus comes, trotting over the hill, back gleaming golden in the late afternoon sun. The white downy feathers of the goose bus are almost turned pink with the sun starting to sink between the hills. Viola hears the little bell tinkle. That will be Walter letting the goose know this is his stop. And then the goose is pulling into the side of the road, right next to where she stands. And Walter is picking up his smart brown suitcase and sliding down the goose's wing to land with a bump and a jump in front of her. The vole and the mole laugh and smile and dive towards each other for a hug. One of those, "I've missed you. It's so good to see you" hugs that we only get when we haven't seen someone for a while. Walter takes his suitcase in one hand and Viola's hand in the other, and together they walk down through the meadow of wildflowers towards her bright red button of a front door and towards the setting sun. Walter says that his mum, Beatrice, sends her love, and Viola beams outside and glows inside. He tells her of his brothers and sisters, his grandmother and his uncle, of the project he's been working on, making an underground treehouse in the twisted roots of a giant oak that dive deep beneath the surface of the earth. And Viola thinks that is the most splendid thing she's ever heard. He tells her how they have burrowed a whole new tunnel that emerges into the world just above a little stream, and how they've polished and sanded and smoothed the curved piece of wood into a slide that goes right from the tunnel entrance to the edge of the stream, so they can launch themselves into the cool waters with a shriek and a splash. They push their way down the garden path, saying, "Excuse me," and "Awfully sorry," to the various plants and flowers that are reaching across the way, pushing them gently aside and stepping over tendrils, and then they arrive at the red button door. Walter puts his hand on Viola's arm, signalling her to stop for a moment. He closes his eyes and takes a few deep breaths, a smile spreading across his face. Then he opens his eyes and solemnly points to himself, and then Viola, and then the door. "The mole, the vole, and the coziest hole," he says. As they go through the door, Walter grins to see his bright red fluffy slippers all ready and waiting for him. This is as much about him being cozy and warm as him not dragging mud through Viola's perfect little home. And he knows that, but it's a lovely, kind, welcoming gesture that he doesn't get anywhere else in the world. He follows Viola down the narrow passageway, suitcase held firmly in his hand, and they pad along in the soft golden glow, heading further and further underground. She guides him to the guest bedroom, and he looks at the same familiar blankets and pillows and breathes in the scent of jasmine, and notices how she has tucked his favourite mints into a little package on the pillow alongside perfectly neatly, crisply ironed blue and white striped pyjamas. A red dressing gown with golden tassels hangs on the back of the bedroom door, and the two have the same conversation they always do. "Do you mind?" says Walter. "I'll see you in the living room," says Viola, and she heads off with that warm, satisfied smile, knowing that everything is exactly as Walter likes it, and he climbs into the crisp pyjamas and wraps himself in the warm dressing gown, and reaches into his suitcase for the presents he has brought. No self-respecting mole ever visits anyone, least of all a vole such as Viola, without taking presents. He's brought a painting from his mum, just a small one, in a little silver frame, and she places it on the table beside her chair. Not many would guess that the vole's favourite animal is an elephant, but Viola holds a fascination for these enormous, gentle giants, and Beatrice has painted the perfect picture of an elephant by a watering hole trunk arched into a question mark as it sprays water onto its gleaming back. And the second present is a jar of raspberry jam made just the day before by his grandmother. A little label stuck on the side with the date and the exact location of the raspberry bush she has used. Beneath the westerly weeping willows, it reads. Viola feels a little shiver of delight run down her spine as she remembers how very sweet those particular raspberries are. As Viola disappears into the kitchen to put the finishing touches to their dinner, Walter takes up a log and puts it on the fire, poking it to watch the flames sparkle and dance. He settles back into his chair and reaches up for the blanket he knows will be waiting for him, opening it out and placing it over his knees. He gives the first of many sighs of contentment, looking at the candlesticks lined up just as they should be, scanning the bookshelves and noting that not a single book is out of place. Viola comes in bearing a tray, one of those with a cushion underneath so it can sit on Walter's knees, and she pours him a glass of deep red cranberry juice that gleams like a pool of rubies in the light of the fire. And then she retreats once more, coming back with her own tray that she settles on her lap, expertly arranging the rug across her knees and popping her feet onto a footstool that is, as you would expect, at the absolutely perfect height. She tells him all about her latest novel, the one where it is possible to travel around the world on moonbeams. And after he has begged perhaps 100 times, she reads him a few pages, and then a few chapters, encouraged by the way he leans forwards and stares into the fire and becomes quite lost in her words. She's always wary of sharing her stories, worried that perhaps this one won't be as magical as the last. But Walter assures her it is wonderful and whimsical, and everything a story should be. And she tucks the pages away to read more chapters in the following days. He tells her of a new card game he has learned, and she goes to a bureau and pulls out a pack, shuffling them with practiced skill as she walks back to her chair. He deals the cards and explains the game, Viola leaning forwards and frowning a little as she concentrates. Their little hands move faster and faster as she learns which cards are good and which are bad, how they go together and how they don't, and they play again and again, lost in the world of diamonds and hearts, clubs and spades. This is exactly what Viola needs, she thinks to herself. She loves her time alone, loves the orderliness of her days, loves sitting behind her typewriter and watching her fingers fly about and listening to the ching as another line is finished and a new one begins. But the friends who visit during her breaks from writing are what give her the ideas for the next stories. They let her mind dance with new thoughts and feelings. Walter, as with so many of the creatures that visit Viola's cozy home, begs for a special story all to himself. She says she will tell him one, but only if he sits back in his chair and pulls the blanket a little higher and closes his eyes and feels the warmth of the fire on his face. Walter does as he is told, and so Viola begins. Once upon a time, she says, there was a little vole called Viola Velvet. She lived quite alone in the coziest hole in all the world, where there was a place for everything, and everything was in its place. And she was a happy vole, reading her books and writing her stories, and making sure socks always stayed in their pairs, and the toothbrushes always stood perfectly to attention. But then, one day, her friend Walter the mole came to visit. He arrived on the back of a goose, sliding down its wing with a little brown suitcase in his hand. He stayed with Viola Velvet for 3 whole days. On the first day, they went for a walk in the woods, picnic basket in hand, and they sat in the shade of an ancient elm, a red and white rug spread beneath them, and they counted butterflies and dragonflies, and shared tea with a passing bumblebee. On the second day, they went to the lake, where they rowed to the very centre in a little wooden boat, and they lay back and looked at the clouds above, feeling the boat rocking gently from side to side on the waves. They stayed there until the sky became the deepest, darkest blue, the sun quite gone, and the first stars shining in the darkness, a full moon lighting their way home. On the third day, they climbed to the very top of a mountain. They left early in the morning, with everything they needed tucked away in backpacks, and they followed a path that wound its way round and round the mountainside, using little stone bridges to cross streams and following the signs that said, "This way, onwards." And once they reached the very top of the mountain, they were standing where the birds swirled and danced in the sky, and they could see the eagles soar and the nightingales floating, and how the geese flew home for the night, a giant V floating gently towards the setting sun. Viola and Walter walked slowly back down the mountainside, heading towards home, where a big red button stood bold against the greenery and led down into the home buried far beneath the surface of the earth. And the 2 friends sat before the fire, with rugs across their knees, and they shared stories of the months when they had not met, and dreams of the future, and promises and hopes and thoughts and ideas that they knew they would only share with their dearest friend. At this point, Viola heard a snuffling sound and looked across at Walter, seeing he was fast asleep. A contented smile spread across his face, his head nodding a little as he snored and dreamed. She thought of waking him and guiding him back to his room, but instead she buried herself a little deeper beneath her blanket and pulled her feet up so she was curled into the tiniest ball, nestling her head against a cushion and deciding that this is where she would sleep tonight. Let us leave them there, 2 tiny, furry, velvet soft creatures, curled up in their chairs before the glowing embers of the fire. For it isn't often that Viola has anyone in her home, and it doesn't do to overstay our welcome. Let us leave them there. Two best friends who will spend 3 glorious days and 3 wonderful nights together, before Viola is once more by herself in a writing room with vases of flowers and piles of shifting paper with her typewriter, and her mind dancing from one story to another. Let us leave them there. The mole, the vole, and the coziest hole. Tonight we're going to meet a little creature who certainly doesn't see the point in closing his eyes and missing out on the fun of being up and awake. So, to try and encourage him to slow down, his friends decide to point out to him all the amazing things that occur when you sleep, like dreams. This is The Owl That Yawned Till Dawn by Jane Thomas. Barnabas Carruthers Wingaloft III is a very small owl with a very big name. It's a bit of a mouthful, to be honest, so we'll call him the name all his friends use, and that's Sparky. He's little more than a tiny bundle of golden fluff and feathers that stick out at funny angles from his head and his wings and his soft downy belly, which is why he got the name Sparky. That, and because he's so very, very, very lively. Sparky is interested in 1,000 different things. This little owl likes football and basketball as much as he likes ping pong and pogo sticks. He likes fishing and singing, walking and talking, flying and floating and dancing and boating. He loves all this so much, however, that there's a problem. Sparky never sleeps. As I'm sure you know, owls generally sleep through the day and come out at night. Nighttime is usually the time they love the most, soaring through dark skies, following the lights of twinkling stars, white wings spread wide across inky black backdrops. You may be very lucky and see an owl in the early light of dawn sometimes, when they're heading home from whatever adventures they've just been on. Perhaps you've heard them just as the sky starts to get dark, when the sun sinks over the horizon, an echoing hoot that travels through the trees and out into the open, letting the others know they're awake, they're up, and they're heading out. Sparky loves the night. He and his closest owl friends play flying games, racing from the great oak across to the mighty pine, dashing past branches with barely a feather's breadth between wings and wood. And then there are his bat friends, the squeaking gossips of the night sky, who chitter-chatter from dusk till dawn and can flash through the night faster than a will-o'-the-wisp. Moths are always up for races too. And although they're small, they have the advantage that they can fit into teeny tiny spaces and take sneaky shortcuts through the trees. The thing is, Sparky also loves the day. The colours are so much brighter. He can see for miles and miles, and you can't see rainbows at night. If Sparky slept all day, he would have no idea that rainbows existed. And being a little blob of gold himself, he loves hanging out at the end of them. During the day, Sparky gets to spend his time with a load of different creatures, and some of his best friends are cats and dogs who get to tell him all about the insides of homes where they live. He's all sorts of fascinated by houses and cottages and high-rises and garden sheds. Anywhere, really, that people like to sleep. He flew into a house once and was so giddy with excitement, he raced into the back of a wardrobe. The door closed behind him, and he accidentally spent an entire night in there. It's hard to know who was more surprised, the little old lady who opened the wardrobe door who let him out, or his mother when he finally made it back home. He promised his mother he would never disappear like that again, and has stuck to his word, getting stories of these inner worlds from the cats who hang out beneath lavender bushes, and the dogs who lounge about on tartan rugs in the sunshine. At this point, Sparky has given up on sleep entirely. It means he yawns an awful lot, but it also means he doesn't have to miss out on a single thing. Little Sparky, asks his grandmother with a smile, why don't you want to go to sleep? I don't want to miss a single thing, says Sparky. Dear Sparky, asks his auntie, taking him under her wing, why don't you want to go to sleep? I have too much energy. I don't want to be still, says Sparky. Darling Sparky, says his mother, polishing Sparky's beak before bed. Why don't you want to go to sleep? There's too much world to see, says Sparky. The three owls sigh as they watch Sparky head out into the early light of dawn. They gather some of the little owl's closest friends, and together they hatch a plan. They've watched Sparky yawn from night till morn. They've seen him yawn from dusk till dawn. And they've decided enough is enough. Sparky, who wants to know everything, must learn how wonderful sleep can be. He must be shown how peaceful it is to lie safely curled up in a warm and cozy bed, blanket pulled up to his beak and head resting on the softest of pillows. He must realize how amazing dreams can be, taking us to places on the other side of the world in the space of a few breaths. He will have more energy, says his grandmother wisely. He will feel happier, says his auntie assured. He will still be our Sparky, says his mother with a smile. Just a Sparky with a lot less yawn. You would think Sparky might have thought it strange what happened as he went about his day. The first friend he came across was a rabbit named Twitch, on account of her little pink nose, always twitching and sniffing the air. You never knew, after all, where someone might have hidden a carrot. Hey, Twitch, said Sparky. Do you want to play log balancing? Let's see who can stay on a log the longest. We could, answered Twitch. Or I could tell you about my dream last night. Twitch told Sparky all about how she had climbed into her bed and pulled her little blue blanket right up to her nose, how she had shuffled her head this way and that on the pillow, and put her ears in just the right places. Then, how she had drawn her legs up so she was curled up in a teeny tiny ball as she fell fast asleep. Her mother had sung her a lullaby, the way she always did, her gentle voice rising and falling in a soft lilt that told the tale of a rabbit long before, who had run through the fields by day and slept safe in his burrow at night. And then Twitch had disappeared into a dream, where she and her brothers had burrowed and burrowed, digging through soft soil and going deeper than they ever had dared before. The colour of the earth had changed, going from dark brown to the red of burnished copper, and then, all of a sudden, they had emerged into a field where the grass was dry, and the sky stretched above was the brightest blue, and in the distance there had been elephants and zebras, and a leopard lazing on a lilo, and a hippo twirling in a tutu. A giraffe in a scarf had strode slowly by, and the tiniest, blackest, shiniest, smartest dung beetle had rolled past with a perfect ball of dung being pushed by his hind legs. And Twitch had danced with flamingos who swooped and bowed and curtsied and swayed, 1,000 together in a lake that shimmered as if filled with diamonds and stars. And when Sparky had heard the dream, he couldn't believe that it was possible to disappear to such magical places while you were fast asleep. He had always longed to go to Africa and wondered however it might be possible, and here was the answer. He just had to fall asleep. But then he remembered the fun of standing on a log that bobbed and rolled as it rested in a lake, and he thought, well, it wasn't possible to do that and fall asleep, and maybe he should stay awake after all. Twitch's mother was calling her in for lunch, so Sparky went on his way. He flew across one of his favourite fields, the one dotted with sunflowers that turned their faces to the sky and basked in the warmth of the sun, and went to the village of Lower Botherington. His friend Hank lived there, a huge bull who lived in the back garden of an old man's cottage, and the pair enjoyed grumping about their day to each other. "Not enough mud," Hank would grumble, thrusting his hooves into barely squelching ground as if to prove his point. "Too much mud," the old man would mumble back, pointing out the line of black-brown footsteps that now led through his living room and straight to the bottoms of his welly-wearing feet. "Hey, Hank," called Sparky. "Care to race me across the field?" "Oh, I would. I absolutely would," said Hank. "But, you see, it's time for my afternoon nap. Nothing better than an afternoon nap, you know. I have the most wonderful dreams. Do you know what I dreamed about yesterday?" And Hank started to tell Sparky all about how he'd lain down in the shade of his favourite horse-chestnut tree. The grass had been just perfect. Not too wet and not too dry. Not too firm and not too soft. Exactly as he liked it. The sun rippled through the leaves of the tree, enough to keep him warm but not too warm, and the breeze rustled against the grass, enough to keep him cool but not too cool. Oh, and he had dreamed the most wonderful dream. A butterfly had landed right on the end of his nose, pink and golden wings opening and closing gently in time to his breathing. When he breathed in, the wings would open, and when he breathed out, the wings would close. Then
The butterfly had taken flight, and Hank had followed as she led him to a silver stream where the water sparkled and sang as it rolled over the pebbles, and she had shown him a cave hidden behind a waterfall, and he had followed her inside. And there, inside, the walls were lit by fallen stars, their glow as golden as the sun, and a frog wearing a beret sat waiting on a log, a paintbrush held in his hand and a faraway look in his eyes. The butterfly led Hank to a clearing in the cave, where light shone down from an opening far above in the ground and lit him in a single beam of sunshine. Then 1,000 fireflies came and placed flowers on his horns and polished the ring he wore in his nose so it dazzled and danced. Then the frog had reached for his paints and stood before his easel, looking back and forth between the canvas and the bull, capturing the moment when Hank was perfectly lit and dressed with 1,000 flowers. And when the frog was finished and the canvas dried, the pink and golden butterfly led him to a cave that opened up as if it were a cathedral beneath the ground, and the painting was hung on a wall with the other masterpieces of the frog. A pea-green duck sailed a boat across the seas, and a snail slid on skis down the side of a snowdress mountain. Here, a chipmunk feasted on golden cherries and chocolate, and there, a caterpillar did cartwheels in a flowing silver dress. Sparky blinked a little as Hank finished his story, and thought, what a wonderful dream that must have been to disappear into. His feathers felt a little heavy, and he felt a yawn pressing against the inside of his beak, but he pushed aside the feeling and instead waved goodbye to Hank and wished him sweet afternoon dreams. If Twitch didn't want to play with a log, and Hank didn't want to race across a field, perhaps his friend Fergus, the great ginger cat, would join him for an hour of tail chasing before the sun started to set. Sparky found Fergus curled up in the conservatory at the back of the cottage he shared with Mrs. Hazelberry. Theirs was the last of the homes in Lower Botherington, before you reached the lane that led to the sea, and Sparky and Fergus often walked together. Well, Fergus walked and Sparky flew down to the beach at this time of day. Tail chasing in the final hours of daylight was something they both loved to do, twirling round and round on the sand before falling with a splish and a splash into the emerald sea. "Hey, Fergus," called Sparky, knocking with his beak on the glass of the conservatory. "Fancy coming out for a bit of tail chasing?" The large ginger cat stretched and yawned. The sun had come at just the right angle onto the comfiest of the chairs, and he had been indulging in a little bonus catnap while Mrs. Hazelberry was off visiting her sister for the day. When she was home, there was so often something to disturb him. The clanging of pans in the kitchen, the rush of the washing machine, the hum of the hoover, and he liked to take advantage of every moment when she slipped away for a while. Of course, when she was home and it was evening, he would curl up on her knee, and together they would have a cheeky bit of bonus shut-eye. But during the day, it was a rare treat to squeeze in a sleep. "I'm sorry," said Fergus, swishing his tail by way of apology.
"You know I would. I love a bit of tail chasing. But I've just emerged from the most wonderful dream, and I'm hoping I can slip back into it." And for the third time that day, Sparky found himself listening to the story of a dream. It didn't cross his mind at all that it was perhaps terribly strange that all his friends were telling him about their most wonderful dreams. Maybe because he was getting awfully wrapped up in the stories, and rather beginning to wonder if he could conjure up something as magical as them. Fergus explained that he had climbed onto the couch and settled his head against his favourite cushion, rolling onto his back and spreading his paws to take full advantage of the warmth of the late afternoon sun shining through the window. He had done his usual trick of counting imaginary stars to fall asleep, and was barely halfway round the outline of a weeping willow done in silver sparkles when he disappeared into a dream. The cat had found himself floating on a flying carpet, one so soft he sunk right into it as he watched the golden tassels flap and flail in the wind. Higher and higher he'd flown into the sky, drifting over trees and forests and far away to the mountains. The carpet had floated down until it landed on a bed of purple heather, and Fergus had stepped off and followed the lilting sound of a lute to the very top of the snow-capped mountain. And there, on a rock, green with moss and as soft as the snow, sat a llama with a little guitar, strumming a song he had learned 10,000 miles away. The llama hummed, a sweet melody lifting into the sky and taking flight with 100 bluebirds that rose on the notes of the song and spread it to all the corners of the land. And then he was back on the carpet and flying away from the mountain and heading over the sea. And he looked down to see a dozen dolphins dancing in the twilight, silver waves rushing over them. Whales wallowed in the waters, warmed by the rays of the sun, and seagulls spread their wings and soared, eyes closed, towards the distant horizon. And the skies turned pink as the sun started to sink lower and lower in the sky. On the backs of the seagulls were oysters, open to the air, and pearls shining and gleaming, polished to perfection. And the oysters rocked back on the feathers of the birds and felt the sun and saw the first stars appear in the sky overhead. As Fergus finished his story, Sparky found he could do nothing to stop his yawn. His beak stretched wide, and he rushed to cover it with his wing, just as his mother had taught him to do. And with his eyes closed, he missed seeing Fergus sneak a smile to himself. He missed that Hank was standing and looking over the garden wall, and he missed that Twitch was hiding in the rose bushes. He missed that his friends were all there, watching and waiting, seeing if they'd managed to work a little magic and convince Sparky that sleep was a wonderful thing, because much as the real world is full of marvels, there is magic buried in our imagination that only comes out in dreams. Sparky was a very sleepy owl as he flew back to his bed that night. His mother and auntie and grandmother had all stayed awake during the day, hoping against hope that he would return home ready to slip into his bed and disappear into a dream. On this night, they hoped, the tiny owl would not yawn until dawn, but instead would snuffle and sniffle and rustle and smile as he slept the sleep of 1,000 nights. It was a very sleepy Sparky who returned to the nest, and he didn't argue as his mother helped him polish his beak before bed, and he didn't argue when his grandmother pulled on his bright red bed socks and his long woolly nightcap. And he didn't argue when his auntie said she would sit by his side and sing him a lullaby. Yes, he mumbled, Twitch's mother sings lullabies to her. I think I'd like that. The 3 owls gathered around Sparky and tucked his blanket right up to his beak and close around his wings and safely over his feet. And they plumped his pillow and asked the glowworms to turn down their glow. Then Sparky's auntie sat on the stool beside his bed and lilted a lullaby, letting it take flight in the small room and drift out into the darkness. She sang the song her mother had sung to her when she was a little owl, too. The one about flying high to paint the stars and dance on the moon. And the one where they rode back to earth on a single moonbeam and then drifted on a lake on a lily leaf. And for the first time in a long time, Sparky didn't worry that he was missing out on anything. He didn't feel that he needed to keep moving and rushing from one place to the next. He didn't sit and imagine the size of the world and how much there was to see. As he lay in the bed, warm and cozy, he felt his wings relax at his sides. He listened to the sound of his breathing, slowing it down, so he drew in one long breath and held it for 1, 2, 3, and then slowly, slowly let out the breath, counting for 1, 2, 3. He felt the rise and fall of his chest, felt everything inside slowing down. He tried again, drawing in one long breath and holding it for 1, 2, 3, and slowly, ever so slowly, letting it out for 1, 2, 3. That is all it took for Sparky to fall asleep. He didn't see the smiles that went between his mother and his grandmother and his auntie. He didn't see because he was fast asleep, disappearing into a dream where he was somehow, in that magical way we can get places in dreams in a single moment, far away on the other side of the world. And he was seeing creatures he had never seen before. And there were flowers nodding up at him that he had never known. and the way the fields poured and rolled into the sea was so different to all he had seen. And the colour of the ocean was new. It was bluer and brighter and larger than he'd ever thought possible. Then he was on an island, and 1,000,000 stars glistened and glittered in the sky. And he was on the sand with his friends, with the animals of the day and the creatures of the night. And they were lying on their backs and gazing up at the sky and watching as moonbeams made words and wrote swirling stories in the darkness. And then, across the black of the night sky, a rainbow stretched from one side of the world to the other, and Sparky smiled in his sleep, mesmerized by how the impossible had become possible, because he had dared to disappear into a dream. This is Prickles the Hedgehog by Gillian Rogerson. One afternoon in Sleepy Forest, a little hedgehog called Prickles was on his way to a friend's party. He absolutely loved going to parties. He loved having a dance with his friends and playing fun games like musical chairs and pass the parcel. The food was always delicious, and he especially liked the cucumber sandwiches and the strawberry trifles. He always had the most wonderful time at parties. But the thing he loved most of all was the balloons. There was something so magical about them. They came in such an amazing variety of colours and looked so big and bright. He'd even seen some that had silver glitter inside them. It wasn't only round balloons that he'd seen at parties. He had seen long balloons too, and one shaped like numbers. Prickles smiled as he remembered a special party he'd been to recently. It was the one he'd never forget. A magician had been at the party, and he had made long balloons into lots of different animals, including a hedgehog who looked very much like Prickles. But even though Prickles loved balloons, there was a problem. No matter how hard he tried, Prickles always managed to pop the balloons. He didn't mean to. It just happened accidentally. One minute he would be minding his own business and having a good time at the party, and somehow a big bright balloon would come his way and land on his spikes, and then pop. And it was never just one balloon. Others would find their way to him too. And then pop, pop, pop. He just didn't know how it happened. None of his friends ever minded. They cheered when the balloons popped, and then they started to pop them too until all the balloons had burst. It was good fun, but Prickles preferred the balloons when they were big, bright and beautiful. As he walked closer to the house where the party was being held that day, Prickles hummed happily to himself. He wasn't going to accidentally pop any balloons at the party, not even one. He had a plan, a very clever plan, and he was absolutely certain it was going to work. Prickles arrived at the house where Scamper the squirrel lived. It was her birthday party, and she was one of his best friends. Prickles knocked on the door. It was opened by Scamper's mother. She smiled at him and said, "Hello there, Prickles. You look different today."
Have you done something different with your spikes? Prickles nodded. I've put some hair gel on to smooth them down. I'm not going to pop any balloons today. He gave her a big smile and handed her the present he'd brought for Scamper. Scamper's mum put the present on the hall table with some others. Then she led to the room where the party was being held. To Prickles' delight, there were balloons everywhere, resting on tables, piled up beneath chairs, and fixed to the bottom of the windows. Bright reds and blues and vibrant yellows and greens. There were even silver ones, and they were much bigger than the other ones, and they had gold glitter inside them. They looked so magical to the little hedgehog, like planets in the sky. Scamper ran towards him. "Hiya, Prickles, thanks for coming." She gave him a closer look. "What have you done to your spikes?" Prickles lifted his chin proudly. "I've put hair gel on them, and now I won't pop any balloons by accident. What do you think?" Scamper told Prickles to turn around. Prickles did so and then waited for his friend's response. Scamper said, "You look different, but I like your new look. Do you still want to play some games? We're just about to start musical chairs." "Oh, my favourite, yes, please." Prickles ran after Scamper and joined his other friends who were jogging around a line of chairs. Joyful music was being played. Prickles waved to his friends. They made room for him in the line, and soon the little hedgehog was dancing in time to the music as he jigged around the chairs. The music stopped, and everyone jostled happily with each other as they rushed forward to find an empty chair. Prickles was lucky to find one, and seconds later, the music started again, and the game continued. Everyone had a wonderful time, jogging around the chairs, and the game was soon over. The birthday girl won, which everyone was pleased about. More games were played, and Prickles had an amazing time. He got warmer and warmer, and his cheeks glowed with joy. He was having such a wonderful time that he didn't notice his hair gel was slowly drying out, until one of the large silver balloons that had glitter inside was lifted on a gentle breeze from an open window. It somehow found its way over to the little hedgehog and landed gently on his spikes. And then, pop! It was so unexpected that Prickles didn't realize it was him who had popped the balloon. He looked around and said, "Who did that?" "You did," his friends replied. They pointed to his spikes and told him they were standing up again. Prickles shook his head. "It couldn't have been me." As he spoke, sprinkles of gold glitter fluttered down from his spikes and landed on his nose. It was the glitter that had been inside the silver balloon. Prickles sighed. "I'm so sorry, everyone. I thought my hair gel idea would work." "It doesn't matter," Scamper said kindly. She gently wiped the glitter off his nose and gave him a big grin. "Now that one balloon has popped, let's pop them all." Her friends cheered and then grabbed the nearest balloon and began to pop them. Prickles joined in, but he couldn't stop thinking about how to solve his balloon problem. There must be a way. Surely. Prickles came up with another idea the very next day, which was lucky because he was going to another party that afternoon. This time it was his friend Whiskers the rabbit who was celebrating his birthday, and the party was going to be held in the village hall. Prickles put on his best bow tie and headed to the party. His plan was perfect. He wouldn't pop a single balloon. He was absolutely certain of it. The party was in full swing when the little hedgehog arrived, and to his delight, there were balloons everywhere. Some were even in the shape of animals. His friends cheered when they saw him. "Hiya, Prickles," Whiskers said. "We're going to play Pass the Parcel. I know how much you love that one. Follow me." It was time for the little hedgehog to put his plan into action. "No, thank you," Prickles said. "I'm going to play another game. It's a special game, and it means I won't pop any balloons." Whiskers was curious. "Really? Tell me how to play it. Is it fun?" "I'm not sure yet, but it could be," Prickles said. "I'm going to pretend I'm a statue, and I won't move, not even a tiny bit. And if I don't move, then I won't pop any balloons." "Oh, I like that game. Can I play too?" "Of course you can. It's very simple. Just stand still." Prickles moved to the side of the room, made himself comfortable, took a deep breath, and then stood as still as he possibly could. A second later, he had an itchy nose, so he gave it a little scratch. Then he took another deep breath and stood as still as he possibly could again. Whiskers stood next to Prickles and took a deep breath just like his friend had done. Then the little rabbit stood as still as a statue too. Their other friends noticed Prickles and Whiskers standing still and went over to ask what they were doing. Out of the corner of his mouth, Prickles said, "We're pretending to be statues. If I don't move, then I won't pop any balloons." Scamper, the squirrel, said, "Oh, that sounds like fun. Can we play too?" "Of course," Prickles replied, trying his very best not to move his mouth too much. His nose twitched. It was itching again, but he didn't scratch it. The other animals formed a line next to Prickles and Whiskers. They shuffled about a bit first, but then took deep breaths and kept themselves as still as possible. The mums and dads looked confused when they saw how still their children were, but they didn't ask what they were doing. Instead, they made themselves a cup of tea and sat down for a while. Prickles gazed around the room and saw lots of big, beautiful balloons resting under tables and chairs. Some were as blue as the sea, and others as red as strawberries. He would have smiled in happiness, but he was a statue, and statues didn't suddenly start smiling. The itch on his nose came back. He wriggled it ever so slightly as he tried to make it go away. His friends were doing a wonderful job at standing very still. Fudge the sloth, was lying on the floor and looked like she'd actually fallen asleep. But she usually fell asleep at parties. The room had been decorated with twisting streamers and birthday banners. But Prickles didn't even notice, because all he could think about was the itch on his nose, the itch that wouldn't go away. But he would not scratch it. No way. Not him. He was a statue, and he absolutely would not move. And then something happened. Prickles suddenly sneezed. It wasn't a quiet, gentle sneeze. It was an extremely loud sneeze, as if all the sneezes he would ever sneeze came out all at once. It was so loud and so sudden that Scamper the squirrel fell over, and Whiskers the rabbit got hiccups. Fudge the sloth woke up and asked, "What was that noise?" She blinked tiredly and then went back to sleep. Bobble the badger put her hand over her mouth and started to giggle. Her lovely chuckle caused the other animals to start laughing too, and their merry laughter filled the room, causing the parents to start chuckling as well. Prickles began to laugh. He couldn't help it. And then something else happened. Out of nowhere, a blue balloon somehow found its way over to the little hedgehog and landed gently on his spikes. And then, pop! Yay! The animals cheered. Let's pop all the balloons. Prickles sighed gently. His plan hadn't worked, but he would think of a better one next time. And he did think of a better plan. A week later, it was Bobble the badger's birthday, and as Prickles walked to her house, he couldn't help but smile proudly. His latest plan was a good one, a very good one, and he knew it would work. He arrived at the house and Bobble's grandma opened the door. Prickles said hello and gave her the present he'd brought. "Thank you," Bobble's grandma said. She frowned. "Is it cold outside?" Prickles shook his head. "No, it's warm." "Oh, right." She frowned some more, but didn't ask about the weather again. "Follow me. The party is this way." Prickles entered the party room. His friends saw him and waved hello. Some gave him curious looks, but didn't say anything. Bobble came running over. "Hi, Prickles." "Hi, Bobble. Happy birthday." "Thanks." She frowned at him and looked just like a smaller version of her grandma. "Is it cold outside?" "No." "Then why are you wearing a woolly hat?" Prickles gave her a big grin. "This is my latest plan. If any balloons land on my head, they won't pop. It's a thick hat, and none of my spikes can stick through it. Have a feel." Bobble reached up and touched the hat. "Yes, it is very thick. Aren't you warm?" "A bit, but I'll be okay. Are we going to play some party games?" Bobble said,
Yes, we're just about to start. It's musical chairs first. Prickles said, "Great, my favourite." He lined up with his friends around a row of chairs. The music began, and they started to move around the chairs. Prickles pulled at his hat. It felt heavy on his head, but he wasn't going to take it off. There were dozens and dozens of beautiful balloons around the room, and he wasn't going to pop any of them. Round and round the chairs everyone went. The woolly hat felt heavier and heavier on Prickles' head, and it made him slower. When the music stopped, everyone moved forward. Prickles wasn't as quick as the others, and he had to leave the game. But he didn't mind, because he didn't have much energy left to finish the game. Wearing such a thick hat whilst jogging around the chairs was hard work. The little hedgehog took a seat at the side of the room and cheered his friends on as they finished the game. The birthday girl won, and Prickles cheered the loudest for her. The young animals played other games, and Prickles joined in for a while. But the hat was making it difficult for him to do much, and he had to keep sitting down. But at least he hadn't accidentally popped any balloons. 3 had already landed on his head, but they had bounced lightly on the hat and then moved away. His plan was working. His friends noticed him sitting down and so decided to sit with him. "Have the games finished?" the little hedgehog asked. "No," Bobble replied, "but we wanted to sit with you. Why don't you take your hat off for a while?" "I can't. My plan is working. I haven't popped one single balloon." He smiled tiredly. "I am feeling a bit sleepy, though. I think I'll go home now, if you don't mind." His friends asked him to stay, but Prickles kept yawning and yawning. He said goodbye to his friends and left the house. As soon as he was outside, he took off his heavy hat and gave his Prickles a good scratch. He walked home slowly, yawning all the time. Who knew that wearing such a heavy hat could make him so tired? As soon as he reached home, he took himself to bed and was fast asleep in minutes. Back at the party, his friends were still sitting together. Bobble said, "Poor Prickles. I think we should stop having balloons at our parties." Scamper the squirrel shook her head. "But he loves balloons. You've seen how he looks at them, and he might feel bad if we don't have them anymore just because he accidentally pops them sometimes." The others agreed with Scamper. Bobble sighed. "There must be something we can do. I love Prickles, and I love having him at our parties." The animals sat quietly and thought about how they might help their lovely friend. It was Luna, the little white owl, who came up with a solution. She flapped her wings excitedly and said, "Oh, I've got an idea. I read something recently in one of my science books, and I think it might help." The animals smiled fondly at their owl friend. Luna loved reading, and she knew lots of interesting facts. Luna said, "We should fill the balloons with a special gas called helium. It makes the balloons lighter than air, and they float high in the sky. If we had those special balloons, they'd be so high above Prickles that they wouldn't touch his spikes." Luna pulled out a small book from beneath her wings. She always had a book or two tucked there, just in case she wanted something to read. Luna opened the book and showed them a picture of some helium-filled balloons. There was also a photograph of a smiling bear who was looking up at some balloons as they floated high above his head. "It's like magic," Bobble said. "Where can we get that special gas?" Luna didn't know, but she called her dad over to see if he could help. When Luna told him about Prickles and her idea, her father said, "I know where to get some from. Mr. Bumble has bottles of helium in his shop, and he's got lots of balloons too. If you like, I can go there now and get some." The little animals cheered and said thank you. Some of the other parents heard what was going on, and they went to Mr. Bumble's shop with Luna's father to help him carry everything. Meanwhile, Bobble and the others came up with a wonderful idea for Prickles. They agreed it was the best idea in the whole world and knew their friend would like it. Not too long later, Prickles' friends gathered outside his home. Some of their parents were there too. Bobble the badger knocked on the door and waited for Prickles to answer it. She grinned over her shoulder at her friends. The knock woke Prickles from his nap. He yawned and stretched his arms above his head. He wondered who was at the door. Maybe it was Bobble, to tell him about the wonderful birthday party she'd had. He smiled. He hoped she'd had an amazing time, and his friends too. Still smiling, Prickles opened the door. Bobble was there. So were all his other friends too, and their parents were there as well. Prickles wasn't sure why they were all there, but he opened his door wider and invited them in. His house was only little, but he would find room for them all. Bobble said, "Thank you, but we don't want to go inside your home. We want you to come out and join the special party." Prickles scratched his head in confusion. "Party? Whose party?" His friends called out, "Your party, Prickles! It's a surprise party." The little hedgehog was too stunned to speak. He came out of his home and looked around his garden. There were balloons everywhere, but there was something different about them. The big
beautiful balloons were bobbing gently in the air, and each one was tied by a long string to something in his garden. Prickles pointed to a gold-coloured balloon and said, "Why is it floating like that? Is it magic?" "Almost," Bobble said. She told him about the special gas and how it made the balloons float in the air. She said it was Luna's idea, but tying the balloons to strings had been hers because she didn't want the lovely balloons to float away to the sky where no one could see them. Prickles slowly turned around and took in the amazing sight. Beautiful balloons were absolutely everywhere, tied to the fence, and his garden furniture, his shed, and his swing set, even on top of the slide. A beautiful rainbow arch of balloons had been tied between two trees. It looked like a rainbow had drifted from the sky and come to rest in his garden. Prickles' heart was so full of love that he didn't know what to say for a whole minute. A big smile broke out on his face, and he said, "Thank you. Thank you so much. This is so kind of you, but it isn't my birthday for months yet." Scamper the squirrel put her arm carefully around his spiky shoulders. "This isn't a birthday party. It's a party to say how much we love you. We know how much you like balloons, and how you've tried so hard not to pop them. But we don't think you should have to change to fit in at parties. We love you just the way you are, with all your wonderful prickles. And from now on, we'll all have these special balloons at our parties." Prickles smiled at his friend and said thank you again. He couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful balloons as they bobbed gently in the breeze. Not only had his friends brought the balloons, they had also brought lots of party food with them too. They had set the food out on picnic blankets at the bottom of Prickles' garden. He'd been too busy gazing at the balloons, and he hadn't even noticed the food until Scamper took him by the paw and led him over to it. Prickles and his friends had a wonderful time at the surprise party. They enjoyed the delicious party food and played lots of fun games. They stayed for hours, and not one single balloon popped. The sky grew dark, and stars began to twinkle. The full moon appeared and shone down on the little animals, many of whom were yawning. The parents said it was time to go home. Prickles' friends said goodbye and went on their way. The little hedgehog stayed in the garden, looking at the balloons in wonder. More stars appeared in the night sky. Prickles yawned and yawned again. He was tired and ready for his bed. He'd had a wonderful day with his kind friends. Moonbeams shone down from the night sky and danced over the glistening balloons. Prickles smiled sleepily. He felt like he was in a balloon dreamland. He moved over to a tree and untied a silver balloon. He held it high and then released it. The silver balloon floated upwards and towards the moon, its string waving goodbye to the little hedgehog. Prickles waved back. He whispered to the moon, "That balloon is for you. Good night." Prickles the hedgehog went into his home and snuggled down in his cozy, warm bed. And just as the silver balloon had drifted gently to the moon, the little hedgehog drifted gently to sleep.